Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Eliot Wright, and welcome to this special talk hosted by the NSCAD University Alumni Association on the exhibition SF-retake with curators Rhonda Rubinstein, Bachelor of Design 1983, and David Peters, Bachelor of Design 1976. Hello, Rhonda and David out in San Francisco.
Hello.
Oh, whoa, balloons. I love it. Um, so I'm speaking to you today from Takaranto or Toronto, which is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples. This land has traditionally been a gathering place and continues to be the home of many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. Toronto rests within the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Covenant, a peace agreement that stretches across the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence region, made between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe to unify Indigenous nations. It is an agreement to share and care for the land, waters, and resources of the region. As many of us are settlers and guests on this land, it is up to us to respect and take part in upholding this important agreement. NSCAD University is located in Jabukduk, Mi'kma'ki, which is the unceded territory, traditional territory and ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq Nation. We pay respect to historic and contemporary Mi'kmaq artists who have, over millennia, created unique art forms and designs, and through generations passed down ways of being, knowing, and doing that are valued and respected. NSCAD University is committed to forging a relationship based on reciprocity as we move forward together in a good way, based on the foundational aspirations in our collective treaties dating back to 1725. In Nova Scotia, we recognize we are all treaty people. I would also like to acknowledge that San Francisco, where Rhonda and David are joining from, is located on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the indigenous stewards of this land, and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this place, as well as for all peoples who reside in their traditional territory. So this talk is a special presentation hosted by NSCAD University's Alumni Association. It's part of, I guess, an ongoing initiative to engage with alumni that have spread themselves all around the world. David, Rhonda, and I are all alumni of NSCAD, and I think we all studied some photography or entirely photography, depending on when we were students there. And as a small but related note, I'm happy to announce that NSCAD University has recently received a large donation from a Toronto-based family foundation to renew their photography equipment. And as some of you who are joining may know, the photography department is a resource that's used by the entire university. So having new top-of-the-line digital and analog equipment is really essential for students to be able to learn and work with equipment. And before we kind of dive into things in more focus today, I'll just give a little bit more background on who's with us, who's speaking today. So I'm a photographer and a photo educator based in Toronto, Ontario. My own artwork and research practice is grounded in landscape, in using photography as a way to bring things to light and to investigate place, which is a very important word within my practice. I grew up in Newfoundland, graduated from NSCAD in 2012, and completed my MFA at Toronto Metropolitan University in 2017, where I now teach. Rhonda Rubinstein is a creative director, curator, and writer based in San Francisco. She began her career in New York's publishing world, working her way up the newsstands to become art director of Esquire, with a pit stop at BIG magazine, which we'll find a little bit more about later. She is currently the creative director of the California Academy of Sciences, where she co-founded the Big Picture Natural World Photography Initiative, an acclaimed annual international competition focused on wildlife and conservation photography, which is currently in its 11th year. Her most recent book on photography, called Seeing It All, Women Photographers Expose Our Planet, was released just last fall. So you can definitely still get a copy if you look for it. David Peters is a Canadian-born designer, curator, and artist who communicates through social practices involving observation, interventions, and public participation. Often produced as series, sequences, or episodes, he uses media at large for installations and performances that comment on or amplify what being human and humane means in a world of living systems. He has collaborated on projects with Krzysztof Wojcicko, Gary Neal Kennedy, Luke Korzesny, and many other artists, designers, philosophers, filmmakers, and writers, including the makers of Big 54 San Francisco. So that's perfect because that brings us to Big 54 and to this exhibition. So 20 years ago, as I understand, 2004, we're in San Francisco. It has been, this big .com explosion, which then busts. And the curators at the time decided that, this would be an interesting moment to look at what San Francisco, sorry, is, and have 20 different photographers kind of bring their own voice to it. And this was brought together in the publication, which was New York based, called Big Magazine. And issue 54 kind of became, yeah, there it is, became a coveted time capsule of San Francisco in that moment 20 years ago. So I think as we, most people probably listening to this talk know, 20 years later, the world is quite a different place. Remote work, technology, artificial intelligence, and the way we, consume and see photography is very different. And still, I think there's that need for looking at photographers' voice, looking at their vision. And so David and Rhonda brought together this exhibition that would bring back many of the original photographers, as well as a few new ones from the San Francisco area, to look at what San Francisco is now. And this exhibition was held at the Harvey Milk Photo Center in San Francisco, and I believe ran from May 4th to June 8th, 2024. So just closed recently. So David and Rhonda, with all of that little introduction, please tell us more about this exhibition.
Well, thank you, Eliot, for that introduction to us and passing the baton here. Let me just, what just happened here? Oh, slideshow. There we go. I was about to share it. Here we are. So, yeah, we have a bit of a presentation. It's 13 slides, I guess we still call them. And that's me on the right, Rhonda on the left, and a little moment from the exhibition in the center. For those of you who've not yet been to San Francisco, just a quick note about it. It's situated in the larger place we call the Bay Area here. It's about 8 million people in the Bay Area, but San Francisco itself is just 800,000. It probably best known for the gold rush of 1846. That was the largest human migration in modern history, when literally hundreds of thousands of people descended on the city seeking gold at the time. And that really set the tone for this as a boom and bust place. That's kind of a lifestyle that one lives when one lives in San Francisco. It's a Victorian era city, much like Halifax, a harbor city. There's been a time when I've actually mistakenly used each other's place names, one for the other, because I am so reminded of that. Rhonda, do you want to sort of continue the setup of what we did with BIG?
Yeah, I'll give a little bit more sort of context. So as we said, it all started 20 years ago with Big Magazine, and that's what you see there on the left. So it was focusing on American cities during that time, and each issue was produced by a different creative team. So we proposed doing a San Francisco issue on the theme of search. I mean, it was just after the .com bust. So, if you can think back, if you're alumni, you probably are old enough to think back to 2001. And after that, there was, when we started this was 2004. So it was Google search was only a couple of years old. And Gmail launched that year, if you can imagine. And then there was a little thing that called the Facebook that also launched. So, but as we alluded to, it was the downturn. And so creatives and photographers had a little bit more time on their hands and if not money in their pockets. So it was just a team of 5 folks, David, myself, an editor, a producer, and a photo editor, Marion Levinson, who was our 3rd sort of curator in the subsequent show. So we developed the 152-page photography-driven magazine around that theme of search. So we commissioned photographers to do these editorials or looks at a range of themes from like transit, biotech, which was kind of emerging at the time, just sort of like new age awakenings, food and drink, various subcultures. And that cover is sort of depicting the classic San Francisco persona, a gay hippie software engineer named Hal Close. So sort of last fall, when we realized that it had actually been 20 years, felt a little old, but we decided to get together, celebrate, have a drink, and had a moment of deja vu, because this sort of lull that we were in sort of was very reminiscent of that sort of post-internet megaboom-to-bust moment. You know, COVID had changed the very nature of tech business and how we were working here. And of course, AI is lurking everywhere. And so we wondered what the photographers were seeing now and what they might be doing. So we tracked down some of the past contributors and then invited them to show their vision of the Bay Area today. And then we also invited some sort of emerging photographers, younger photographers, you know, get more diverse perspectives in there. And you can see the postcard for the show, the promo in the center is the list of the photographers who participated in the show.
And we named the show Retake, sort of a play upon photography terms, both to take a shoot again and also, I guess, sort of retaking San Francisco a bit too.
Yeah, there's part of the sort of the doom loop narrative around San Francisco has kind of spread around the world, and we're trying to sort of retake San Francisco. So that card also kind of shows how that old sort of white coder dude is sort of being pushed aside by a younger sort of Black woman who's goggled into the future. And the photo on the right just shows sort of the exhibition space. When we proposed this to the director of the photo center, she loved the idea of bringing these renowned photographers into this curated show. And in fact, she had assisted one of them on the original big photo shoot 20 years ago. She was
that's so fun.
Yeah, she was retouching Elena Dorfman's images. So it was very funny.
So for those of you who don't know the Harvey Milk story, Harvey Milk, for whom this center is named and is conveniently 2 blocks from our flat. So it is truly neighborhood, but Harvey Milk was the first openly gay man to be elected to public office in California, and he operated a camera store on Castro Street, also in our neighborhood. And he was a very prominent organizing activist figure for gay rights and just the neighborhoods at large until 1978, when he and Mayor George Moscone were assassinated. The Recreational Arts Center was renamed for him. And as mentioned, it's the oldest and largest community wet darkroom in the United States. So that was our venue of choice, and we were quite happy to be able to work with them there. Here's a glimpse at part of the installation we did, and this is shows the work of 4 photographers. We took an editorial design approach to how we curated and grouped the images, in part to enrich the sort of view of the city and ways of looking at it. You see the word revisit. We followed that retake, revisit, recreate, realign, etc., as an echo of the way that we used verbs in organizing big picture.
Big magazine.
Or big magazine. Big is a big word in our world. Very San Francisco. And at right are some views of the installation, the entry wall. We incorporated a little bit about who the political figures in 2004 were. Gavin Newsom was mayor. And by 2024, he's the governor, and London Breed is the mayor. And on the bottom right there is the wall of Big. That's where we took spreads of the entire issue of the magazine from 2004 and put it on display as a reference point for and contrast for the rest of the exhibition. So now a couple of examples of photography that we chose to incorporate. On the left is a picture by Laura Morton, referred to as Cuddle Puddle. Cuddle puddles are kind of a Burning Man inspired moment where people come together with stuffed animals, but basically to celebrate community. These are probably techno-utopians. It's kind of an enduring theme here in San Francisco is like the disruption of tech and the new configurations of society produced by that. I think that image on the right by Kamal X called Wake Up is a little bit of the unbelievers, a little bit of the resistance to that same imposition of social order. Regardless, they are two of the sort of most compelling images that people were attracted to, although it was an extremely rich show. We'll continue more with that.
So here are a couple of images that are sort of responses to the California wildfire, or wildfires, I should say, because they're actually happening right now. We heard these alerts this weekend and evacuations, and there's currently the emergency website reports about 2,000 fires and almost 90,000 acres burning in California. So the one on the left by Tabitha Soren is called The World Burns. And so that is the Bay Bridge in San Francisco in 2020. It was the day that the smoke from the northern wildfires just covered San Francisco, and it was this very apocalyptic orange. This is not typical subject matter for Tabitha, but it is very in line with her work, which is sort of this combination of beauty and pathos and violence. And on the right is Dwight Eschliman. And so for the issue of Big, he had taken on the subject of Northern California's most anticipated, or at least predicted, natural disaster, which at the time was earthquakes. There's a great shot. He photographed a section of UC Berkeley Stadium where the Hayward Fault runs the length of the field from goalpost to goalpost. So, but for San Francisco retake, Dwight is revealing our current, human-created disaster, the climate fires. So this photo represents 1 hour. So it's taken from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. on August 25th, 2001, during the Caliber fire in Kingsbury, Nevada. So each square is like one section of one position of the sky, slowly changing color. So it's part of a series that he does called One Day, which has 86,400 seconds in a day, 24 hours of 60 minutes of 60 seconds sort of equals 84,000. And so it's basically one point of the sky photographed every second, and this is sort of abstraction as attraction.
Rhonda, the photo on the left by Tabitha, is that like for all intents and purposes unadulterated? Is that what the sky looked like? Or is it, because it almost looks like a negative? It's so freaky. Do you know?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I mean the the sky did look like that. I mean, it was really just these. I mean, this is a more cloudy sort of mood. Like
Mm.
mostly it was just this flat, dark orange during the day. This could have been processed because the water does have kind of a slightly unusual color, but that's yeah, I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
don't know the answer to that
No,
question.
no, it's fascinating. And the pairing with the one on the right is it brings
Mm.
out the color in a really interesting way.
Yeah. Um, Moving on a little bit. So, you know, when you're observing life in a city, some things never change as cultures find different ways to express themselves and entertain themselves. Here we have work by three people, Dennis Hearn, Jeff Braverman, and Gabriella Hasbun. Dennis Hearn here shows so film noir and the fascination with film noir, it's a very San Francisco thing. The festival started more than 15 years ago, and people take to costuming themselves. And this moment, the kiss, was actually recreated that when this couple learned that the photograph was appearing in the exhibition, they showed up a few days later in full wardrobe and recreated the kiss in the gallery so that it could be a meta moment. Quite funny for us to see how people responded to the exhibition. In the middle, so Jeff Braverman has undertaken a tarot card set that is a kind of an expression of the LGBTQIA two-spirit plus community. Um, and 73 photo shoots, each one manifesting an aspect of Tarot, and he's looking for a publisher for this Tarot deck. Um, and then to the right is Liliana, a radical monarch, and sort of this presence of youth who are resolved, determined, if you would, to reshape their communities and find a different place in the world for the thinking that youth bring. Um,
She also came to the exhibit
yes.
opening, so it was actually quite wonderful. There were a number of a number of the photographers came, but also a number of the subjects came and posed with sort of with their pictures.
We did not anticipate that, but it was like, why wouldn't it be when it could happen this way? It was quite funny. So and then more.
Yeah, so this is showing sort of the magazine with the photograph um, in the show, which is not how they appeared, but it's kind of interesting to see how that works. So I think about 12 of the original 20 photographers participated, which was actually a really sort of great response after 20 years to have people be interested and willing to participate, and especially if some of them have gone on to become really sort of important figures in photography. And for us, it's sort of interesting just to see the evolution of their work. And you know, what we learned from the curatorial process is that majority of these important voices from the original BIG are still like relevant and leading figures. And you know, despite the camera in every pocket and AI in every screen, it definitely left us thinking that and believing that this, you know, is a fully developed artistic expression, you know, this perspective and voice that resonates with people on an emotional level is what's needed. So we were very sort of encouraged by the work and the response. So this is Winnie Wintermeyer, who is German-born, based in San Francisco. He's an editorial photographer who's worked for a number of publications around the world, and his work is in SF-MoMA Artist Gallery. So this was actually the first story in the issue of BIG. You can see 01. And the idea was just going to get a view of the San Francisco landmarks as visited by these three doggy diner heads carted around on a flatbed truck. And Doggy Diner was a 1940s diner recognized for these oversized cartoon characters. So on the right is a current image by Winnie, and it's also showing a different variation on car culture. So the car sideshow and the donut maneuvers that continue to happen almost weekly here in San Francisco and leaving their mark literally on the streets. And one of the things that we were talking about earlier, how interesting it is that that photograph could not have been taken 20 years ago because drones just weren't available, weren't readily available.
Yeah, I think with those two photos, something I hadn't clued into when we were talking about Winnie's work before is the fact that they're both traces of things that are no longer really there, even though they take approach very, very differently, right? But they're looking at like, you know, something that has been in a very different way, right?
Yeah, it's very public spectacle, if you would. The landmarks, the nature of these cartoon sculptures that grace these diners, and the way the sideshows operate. The sort of the contesting of space now that we live in. It was much more civil when you could roll up to a diner. So.
And these are Richard Barnes, who is also sort of renowned artist with solo exhibitions at all the museums in well, his work is in the museum MoMA and the Whitney and the Met, and has solo shows around the world. But his themes are really around sort of science, history, archaeology, and architecture, and he uses photography as a means to think about and represent the past. And so again, these are not how are seen in the show, but it was fun for us to pair together images from Big Magazine and the exhibit to show today and talk about and see what they have in common or how things have changed. But here, I think both of Richard's works reveal these very fascinating insights into what's normally not seen. So on the left in Big, the story was called View, and it showed views from apartments around the city, basically showing one of their most valuable traits, which is the view out the main window. And in the exhibit, as you saw, we mounted all of the pages from the magazine. And this story was at reading height, and people were fascinated by that small text, which here displayed the median rent in 2004. So for a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom overlooking the San Francisco Bay, that 2-bedroom was averaged out about $2,600 a month. And today, it's about 3 times that if you can actually find that apartment. And then on the right, it's from a series that he calls Animal Logic, which are these behind the scenes restoration work being done on specimens and dioramas in natural history museums. And so he really sort of reveals the level of artistry and the scientific detailing that eventually become these meticulously recreated scenes of the wild. And of course, now that I work at a natural history museum, and specifically the one in which this photograph is taken, sort of the irony of creating that perfect past and the idea of capturing animals to celebrate the wild is even more resonant.
Yeah, these both pairs here seem, well, they're kind of a privileged view. One normally doesn't get to go to these places to see these kinds of things. It's part of the privileging of photographers to be able to make requests to get into apartments and take pictures like this or behind the scenes. It's an aspect of being a photographer that more could be done with. I'll talk for a moment about Todd Hydo. So Todd was born in '68 and came to California and was a student of Larry Sultan there. On the left is one of the spreads from Big Magazine. On the right is the work that we chose from among the images he offered. And we gathered them under Recollect as a way of expressing them. Larry Sultan encouraged Todd, who had a vision of domestic life, but he didn't want to include family members, which was a signature of Larry Sultan, some of Larry Sultan's work. And he was encouraged to sort of explore those places without the people. And it led Todd into this kind of very emotive investigation of place, often after hours or in twilights or the dark, where one can see the remnants, or a kind of a cinematic view of place, but somehow without the menace that much of nighttime cinema tends to lead to. They're just very mysterious places, and quite yeah, just intensely evocative. Todd, by the way, has a right now contemporary with this talk, a 6,000 square foot exhibition of possibly the largest survey of his work done to date, at the Casemore Gallery, which is very, very worthwhile seeing for anyone who's out here and can. Here's a detail from that shot. He does from time to time do these portraits, and although he's best known for his landscapes, and these portraits are very poignant, very discomforting and magnetic. Again, one of the areas that people just came back to and wanted to spend time with, understanding or taking comfort in the discomfort shown by these people. Onward, near the end, or actually the end. This is the beginning of the end.
Well, just a few more shots so you can actually see what the place looked like. So the top images are the opening. That's Mayor London Breed, sort of talking to the crowd. Apparently 700 people showed up for this opening, which is kind of staggering, but they counted it. And she sort of just spoke eloquently about the role of photography in her upbringing. She's also a neighborhood person. And there was a photographer, David Johnson, who photographed the Black community and the jazz community in Fillmore, who was kind of very central in that. And then there's at the bottom some of the photographers in front of their work. At the bottom, the smaller picture is actually the original BIG. They're I think it's the 5 or 6 of us kind of all gathered for the opening. And then below is the photographers at the opening of the show. So just a great community event, which was one of our other goals that we really sort of wanted to do.
Yeah, it's really for me a kind of a trifecta to be able to celebrate art, in this case photography, but to celebrate art and the place in which it was made by the people who live there, and have it be about that place. It was very much a production and an affirmation of community, and very fitting for the Harvey Milk Photo Center and the neighborhood at large, many of whom came out to see the show and support the center. Which brings us to the end. This is a detail. These a paper material used by photographers as backdrops that we basically lined the gallery with to even out the surface and make it a more appropriate environment for placing the photographs. So this is the takedown. Now you're invited to take us up with any questions.
All right, thank you. That was actually going to be one of my questions, was why the paper was used, but I guess you've already answered that now. It's a nod to the photographic backdrop as a material.
And also, we didn't like the wall that existed there.
It's funny how you have to deal with the
material. Yeah.
How do we make this more even? Oh, let's just put paper over it. Do you guys want to stop your screen share there so that we your faces come full screen again? Excellent. Now we can see you bigger, which is wonderful. Well, thank you very much for giving an overview to that and providing more context for this exhibition and some of the artists' work that were featured in the show. At this point, we can turn our attention over to questions from the audience, those who have joined us. You can either type your question into the comment section, which I will go down through, or if you'd like, you may also unmute yourself and ask a question at such a moment that is available. We do actually already have one question I can see in the chat now from Jane Brown, who asks, will this show travel?
No, not as an exhibition, although the website for the exhibit operated by the Harvey Milk Center is due for a refresh. And I believe that all of the images that were on view will get incorporated onto that web page. So there is that. And there's a curator statement there too. It would have been fun to have traveled the show. I'm just not sure yet what that would entail. So
yeah, when we did get together for the 20 years sort of celebration or drinks and sort of concocted the idea of an exhibition. Of course it was going to be an exhibition that possibly could happen in different parts of the city, and then we could do a little publication to like showcase it. And then when we sobered up the next day, realized that doing an exhibition in addition to our regular sort of work was probably just a good start and end.
Yeah.
One question, just a very simple one, which I'll quickly answer, from Jess Winton. Will this recording be available? And yes, as far as I understand, this talk will be available, I believe, through the YouTube channel to be viewed again later in the future. Are there any other questions from anyone in the audience at the moment? If not, I do have a couple that were sent in advance, which I can perhaps dive into to keep us moving forward. So one is about the difference between photography as a publication and photography on the walls of a gallery. So you have this thing that was done from a publishing house, right? A major magazine. And then you followed up with an exhibition 20 years later. So times changed, but we also are in the world of Instagram and the web and things like this. And these are two tangible media, right? So how as curators, and also communication designers, do you guys deal with these two spaces, and how do you think about those?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, one of the interesting things about doing the exhibit, we wanted to give the context for the new photographs, and so we wanted to show sort of BIG magazine, and we did have some issues for on view, but also decided to put up that wall so we could see it all. And so suddenly, what is typically a print publication, a sequential publication, becomes sort of a gallery view. It becomes a whole different thing when seen all at once. But for editorial, for magazine, you really can create the narrative. You can sort of create the journey through from photograph to photograph, from spread to spread, and that's kind of the beauty of publications. Whereas in the gallery, it was a very different approach, because it's more of a, you see it all at once, but you also sort of individually. And so that's why we thought we could group some of these photographs by different photographers under these themes to create a little bit more of an editorial sort of perspectives on the work.
Yeah. One of the things also that we did with BIG, Rhonda reminded me that we sort of structured the verbs and the photo essays and commentaries from start of day till end of day. The last sequence in here is dream, for instance. So we're able to envision this as a whole, a wholeness, that is experienced in a more recurring way. You could move backwards and forward in time through the book, but the gallery, people just did what they did. They just would walk up, and while we did a lot to try and contextualize it, it was interesting how like free range viewers are, and just go to the images that attract them, and I'm not sure that while we made sense and we had rationale for why we grouped images together, I don't know that it was nearly as important as it would have been, or as was practiced in editorial design in a publication.
There was a more looseness to it, you'd say, in a way.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Much more. Much
Interesting.
more an open system of engagement.
Yeah. But it's interesting that you still, decided to bring those kind of headings as a way of grouping things together. There's still this kind of editorial initiative that comes into the exhibition as a follow-up, logically, from the publication, but also I might guess because that's the way you guys have worked
That's
for
the way
so
we
many
think.
years,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, yeah,
Well,
makes
it's
sense.
always more interesting to see the combination, like even as we're saying, like when we put the slides together, we were trying to figure out, like, let's show a few images, and these juxtapositions that we showed today were not ones in the show, but were also really interesting and provoked other sort of
Yeah.
thoughts. And so that is kind of the nature of curation.
I have a really great follow-up to that, and then there's another question that was thrown into the comments there. So there are a lot of different approaches to photography in this show, right? People coming to it from more kind of commercial aspirations to, very fine art, experimental, conceptual. In this case, were the works created? Were any of these works created specifically for this exhibition, or were they brought together from existing bodies of work? Or how, because that's a really interesting thing about thinking about how these projects exist in a group, but then as part of their own thing separate from it.
The one that was created specifically for this exhibit was David's piece,
Okay.
which we actually did not show, but if you want to describe it.
Yeah, so for Big Magazine, there's this 20 years ago, we kind of celebrated the 49-mile drive. 49 miles is the square territory of San Francisco. And so I did 49 pictures of 49-mile drive. And then for this show, I had the thought of photographing the city as seen again from the traveler or tourist point of view. So I bought a ticket on what's called the Big Bus, which is a double-decker bus, and found a place on the upper deck, and made photographs of of what you would see from the Big Bus as it traveled from the landmark Golden Gate Bridge all the way to basically Haight-Ashbury, taking you down through the downtown, through Union Square, down Market Street, and so forth. And then I assembled that into a 10-foot long, 10-inch high ribbon of images. So that was a commission specifically, or a piece produced specifically for this exhibition. All the other works were ones that we solicited from the photographers, giving them some clues as to the kinds of connection points that we could imagine would make sense, based either on what they had done previously, or that knowing who was then participating would help us fill in some of what we considered to be the gaps.
Right. You can, I believe, see just a quick example of David, that work you're talking about. If you go to the SF-retake website, there's a click here in the kind of information guide at the top. It says click here for gallery guide. And the gallery guide there will show you kind of an overview of the works that were in the show. I think I might be able to put a direct link in the chat.
Yeah.
There now. Yeah. Right. Well, thanks for answering that question about kind of context for the works and things there. So Chris Donovan is asked, you talked about geographic similarities between Halifax and San Francisco. Do you see any similarities or strong differences art world and photography wise?
Mm, mm. Um, we do get back to Halifax most years. We're not as connected to the photography community as we would perhaps like to be able to see what's happening there. And I know the Nova Scotia Art Gallery has been touch and go with changes and so
Yeah.
forth.
Yeah.
So it's more difficult to make that linkage.
Hmm.
Um, uh, from a differences point of view, um, I think San Francisco photographers have had the benefit, certainly historically, of incredible patronage coming out of the tech community. That's not entirely dried up. AI is bringing some of that back because AI just, they like to see themselves, the makers of AI. And this is ground zero for AI creation.
Hmm.
Uh, but as did the techies of the turn of the millennium, they really love to see themselves, and so there was a tremendous amount of coverage of the personalities and individuals who are doing the technology. So this community was nurtured by that, and I don't know if there was anything comparable to that in Halifax.
Hmm. Interesting.
Um,
Those who are in Halifax might have a perspective on that, which we'd be interested in hearing.
I'll wrap by asking, and you kind of alluded to this a little bit at the conclusion by the last slide showing the people that were there and the presence. Um, how how important do you feel that photography, uh, and by extension, I suppose you could say, design, communication design, is for bringing people together in this day and age? Here we are talking from three different places in the world, right? And that's a big change in the way we could have done this 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And photography is still here, even analog. And community seemed to be an important thing for you in that. So yeah, just something, if you have any thoughts on photography's role in informing or creating community.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, it did sort of surprise us a little bit, but it's actually, now that I think about it, not all that surprising because, so you sort of mentioned Big Picture, which is the conservation and wildlife photography competition that I co-launched at the Academy of Sciences. We, in the past, so it's an annual competition, we used to do sort of an awards program where we brought in the photographers. Since COVID, it's changed a little bit, but we have had a lot of photographers come in, and the getting together and talking to other photographers is really what they most enjoyed and appreciated out of all the things. I mean, there was like the award money, there was like all of this other stuff, but so it's these lunches where they could just talk about what they were doing and how they were doing it, and the camera equipment and all that was just so key because photography is a much more sort of individual sort of activity than design, where design you're often working with other partners or working for clients. And so it was interesting to have that echoed in this exhibit where the photographers, we did a talk, for example, one night where we had some of the photographers who were in town, and actually one happened, Olivier Laud happened to be coming from Vietnam, and he showed up a little bleary-eyed, but I think that's kind of
It
an
produces,
interesting
yeah,
community
yeah,
because of that.
yeah. There's also, as I reflect on your question, um, photography is a language like design. And as people get together, they learn more and more about how the language works and what the grammar of the language is and the dimensions of it and who's stretching the language and and just how their own work, because they have a camera in their phone, how their own work and the things that they take pictures of are reflections of themselves as much as they are a story of the life they've lived, as much as they are part of how this culture uses photography to come to terms with itself, to have some idea of how vast it is, and where voices, as we refer to them, although there's, because we just don't have the words to describe people who use photography or images, you know, to just show us what it means to be in this world now. So you know, the capacity of photography, its resilience, I think was a word we used. It seems to endure through all these transformations and morphologies. It's collected its own lore. It's accepted now as art, which was contested when I went to art school in the 70s. It was still being challenged as an art, as a form of art. I think the practitioners are increasingly appreciated as artists, and as such, creating community around the art making practice has become just accepted, you know, just and then all we're doing in our own way as curators and with a center like this is nurturing it. It's just helping it find itself.
What an excellent place to end.
Well, I don't want to end without acknowledging some of the people who taught me or were so helpful to me in my life,
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
understanding photography, because, you know, my grandfather was a photographer in Fredericton. He was introduced to photography growing up as a boy on Prince Edward Island, and he saw a tourist with a Brownie camera, and that changed his life. But it was really not until I got to NSCAD when I had teachers like Gunter Karkat and David Mackenzie, or I got to work with photographers as a designer, in particular Larry Hagar and Anthony Montserrat. But there were also many others, but those two in particular really helped me appreciate what a photographer does in the framing and isolation. Just that practice of framing, which was very complementary to publication and graphic design of its day. Rhonda, do you have some acknowledgements or,
Gosh,
you know, people who really helped you get to get photography?
I mean, the moment was really sort of the Family of Man book, that is known. Edward Steichen is known for having sort of put that together, but really it was with the help of Dorothea Lange, sort of photographer who was less acknowledged, but really sort of brought that together and opened the world of photography up. And you know, I of course had my own dark room when I was younger and went to NSCAD to study photography, and have had a number of teachers there through time, but really it's photographers who I work with, or photographers who, you know, were in the book Seeing It All, that I got to sort of see the world through their eyes, and that's been the most educational and inspirational for me.
Yeah. Again, maybe a solitary form of creation, but it doesn't happen alone. You need all those people to inspire you and to teach you and to move you along and to be a part of something to you know, bounce off of, and it's great to hear how you guys both came to that.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us to participate and moderating this, Eliot.
Yes, thank
Really
you.
appreciated it.
And thanks to the NSCAD Alumni Association for deciding to ask the three of us to do this thing. And for those of you who decided to take some time out of your afternoon today to listen to what we had to say. So keep an eye for the recording in the future, and for other NSCAD Alumni Association talks that happen throughout the year. So thanks everyone, and farewell for today.
Thank you.
Thank you all.